Growing up as a child, I've always been fascinated by what is now virtual reality technology. As long as I can remember, I have always believed that someday I could take part in a video game, thrust it into a simulation where I could jump high, run fast, and float in the air. My mind loved the idea of it. I begged my parents day and night to give me an Oculus of my own consistently. When I eventually got my hands on one, you can believe I spent day after day putting myself in numerous amazing scenarios on it, despite it being nothing more but a mere Oculus Go. I got to a point where I was in a virtual world more so than the real one, a scary thought itself. But amongst the sea of games I could play in an unreal world, I found myself subjected to a game deep within the pixelated ocean, one that was not meant to be found. To cut the story short, I played this unheard game, and after completing it, I refused to play in the virtual reality world for months. The game I had played truly frightened me. Maybe that was because my young brain was more susceptible to such scary imagery. Looking back at the game now, that shook me to my core, I can still see where the fear I got as a child rose from. I went back to the exact game years later, and after I found it again, and let's just say, I was still incredibly spooked out. The game in question is called ANGEST. ANGEST is a very short, free experience only available on certain VR devices. You are subjected to entrapment on a Russian spaceship in the middle of deep space, commanded around by a robot named Constant, as you do many of his short tasks day after day. The plotline seems simple enough, but beneath the surface of this game is a dark truth that breaks the mind of our protagonist, unraveling the fictional reality this game takes place in, and showing us insanity at its most surreal. It's hard to believe I stumbled upon such a treasure of a game at such a young age in life, by mere chance as well. This game, while tame and very story-driven on the surface, unravels into a terrifying mess with unclear motives and a story that seems unchangeable. But the longer you replay and explore the spaceship you find yourself trapped on, the more things become revealed to us that explain what is one of the most confusing and terrifying plotlines I have ever perceived in media. And today, that is exactly what I plan to talk about. I am going to be going through this game and its narrative, while explaining what everything means, the secret endings, the trippy visuals, and of course, how it manages to startle everyone who plays it. So, without further ado, let's dive in. The story of ANGEST begins with us awaking in a dark void, as a Russian voice guides us through it. This robotic voice addresses us as Valentina and Vala. We eventually reach a massive wide abyss, and once entering, we awaken with the title card reading Day 1. And now, we find ourselves in the sleeping quarters of sorts as the same voice tells us to get up and prepare for work. The room we awaken in is very childish, old school theme as this old-timey song lingers in our ears. Outside, we find ourselves face to face with Constant, our AI companion for the space ride. I want to take a moment to share how odd this character is. I remember first coming face to face with this computer and how it genuinely startled me. The idea of a TV monitor with distracting and motley colors and a moving voice visual rubbed me the wrong way. That feeling only becomes greater the longer you hear their voice. It being a Russian accent, along with it being my first experience of one, made me uncomfortable. With Constant, he will ask you questions, and on the numbers on his side, you can answer them with the chosen prompts. It's a unique mechanic that helps decide the fate of Vala later on in the game. After meeting Constant, he directs you to the lab. The lab is one of the most important places of your playthrough. Similar to how you answer Constant's questions, Constant will put up many questions on the projected board, and you must answer them via your honest opinion. The choices you make in these scenes are how you decide the endings you get in-game. I will discuss the endings in a later segment, as they play an integral part to the overarching story of this game. From here, the game begins throwing you in a loop. For the next few days, you begin to do the same steps you have done the previous day over and over again. The big thing about this looping process is that things do change every day if you pay enough attention. The difficult part about all this is that when you are stuck in an area, you aren't often able to leave without being thrust into the next part of the game. But if you do begin noticing the changes in the environment, you can find some unsettling and confusing stuff. The first of these scenarios comes from a dream state, where Constantine talks to you as images and words flash up upon the screen at a rapid pace, almost like a hypnotic trance trying to influence Valentina's mind. The dialogue here changes depending on what choice options you have made earlier in the game. However, this part of the game is where the story begins to get freaky. As the dream begins to end, a shadowy figure projects itself onto the screen. On your first playthrough, you may think nothing of it, but by looking behind you, you spot a glitchy hooded figure with bright yellow eyes staring down you menacingly. I like to refer to this character simply as the hooded figure, and keep them in mind because they continue to return in the game later on. This is the point where the game isn't subtle with its changes. Audio may begin to vanish mid-sentences, and events which repeat normally have major changes to their pattern. In the garden, instead of cutting off leaves or harvesting plants, the pipes begin leaking gas which you must fix. But when you leave, you will be shocked to find one of the constants outside of the garden shattered and distorted. Its screen has been broken and its voice module has glitched to a point where it's hardly decipherable as to what Constantine is saying. But when day 27 rolls around, many things change. You wake up as Constantine calls you over as per usual, but something is off this time. By walking up to the door, it suddenly is pulled open by the vacuum of deep space. This part caught me way off guard during my first playthrough. It's a perfect subtle scare for anyone who is now familiar with what this game throws at the player. What's even stranger is what happens when Valentina awakes from this strange dream. This time, as you do your biometric test in the lab, things begin to change as you are forced to pick certain options, almost as if you are being brainwashed, forced to obey something. The rest of the day plays out normally until it's time for you to sleep. As you crawl into your bed, a loud, barging glitch sound corrupts the screen in your ears. Looking behind you, the hooded figure watches you sleep, staring, silently staring. This part of the game was where I initially left my first playthrough. It scared me so bad because this was my first encounter with the hooded figure, and since it came out of nowhere, my young mind had quite the scare from it, and awful nightmares. Day 29 proves that the hooded figure has some kind of influence on us. For the entire day, we can't hear anything. It's all silent and muffled. The outside space turns into a deep misty blood red as the walls of the ship are painted over with some kind of blue substance. Constantine tries to speak with you and guide you as normal, but he is silent. He's seeing his body move but no voice coming out is startling to see, and it really makes you feel uncomfortable, almost as if nothing matters, and that you are truly stranded in space. To Valentina, this ship is space. Speaking of Valentina, halfway through the day, a vicious dream is shown in her mind, depicting her doing the same thing over and over, representing her looping habits as the asteroid slowly moves into the ship's walls, crashing and sending debris flying towards her. You then awake, revealing that an actual asteroid has hit the ship. You quickly suit up as Conte directs you out of the ship in a tight harness. With a handy tool, you can then spray the damage on the ship to repair it. Until suddenly, the music tenses up as a loud ringing grows. You don't know why, but when you look behind you, another asteroid comes hurtling at you with great pace, hitting you directly. The first time I didn't notice the asteroid until it was way too late, and seeing it right in my face as I turned around gave me a deserved scare. From here, the ship is in shambles as Valentina miraculously returns in perfect shape. You wander a ship stuck in zero gravity as everything destroyed floats before you. You arrive at the lab where Constantine instructs you to sit down and do another test. But as you sit down, you hear the glitchy sound again as Constantine assures you everything will be okay. You look up and the hooded figure is standing there, watching you. From here, the game ends and you arrive back where the game first began, in a dark void. Only this time, you must make it back to where you started, and when you do, you find a puzzling sight. Where you used to sit at the start of the game is now replaced with a strange humanoid cat. Hairless, dead, pale cat. You enter its body and the game ends, as you may think. The game throws you in one more final loop. You are directed to leave the habitat once more. As you step out of your room, Constantine appears, this time by a different alias and voice, that of Valentina. That is how the game ends. Overall, the gameplay and story create a very interesting tale. Confusing is the right way to put it. The game starts by showing you the ropes and begins to alter it in front of your eyes. The way it subtly drops hints that something is wrong is what creates the unsettling atmosphere this game has. The space theme of the game doesn't help it either. It implies that you are alone, but within the game, you really aren't. The hooded figure follows you when you least expect it. The world changes to reflect Valentina's insanity, and the audio does everything it can to make you feel like you aren't at home. However, I'm getting ahead of myself. We aren't quite done yet with the story of ANGEST, it tells us. You see, you may not believe me, but this game has numerous endings that you can unlock if you do search around enough. These endings reveal a bigger truth about what this game really is and what it all means. So, next up, let's talk about the game's 4 main endings. When you first complete ANGEST, you may think the ending you get is naturally meant to occur. In fact, you may believe that in every playthrough, you are destined to get the same ending. However, people may not know that there are an additional 2 endings on top of the main 2, which can forward the truth of this strange world. To help you all keep track of the endings, I've named and listed all 4 of them for you all. The 2 endings the majority of people who play the game will get, which I'll call the obedience ending and the disobedience ending. These 2 have weird names, but later you will understand why I named them this way. The final 2 endings are the secret ones that only players who take the time to explore and do anything possible will find. These endings are what I'll nickname the Escape to Home ending and the Stranded in Space ending. I'll start with the first 2 endings, as it's what most people are familiar with. Both these endings are practically the exact same as I previously described, but remember when I mentioned prior that the choices you make in this game during the biometric tests and talking to Constantine affect your story? Those options are how the ending of this game changes. If you focus on working, staying positive to Constantine, and always picking and doing what Constantine wants you to do, you will get the obedience ending, where he will both at the halfway point of the game, and at the end, remark on this. Same goes for the disobedience ending, where if you act negatively towards him, refuse everything on the ship, and don't help him, you will get the disobedience ending. It's like the obedience ending, but the dialogue of Constantine also changes to reflect this. Overall, the endings are the exact same with changing of Constantine's words to reflect your actions. The majority of the good or bad choices is what decides which ending you will get. The dialogue you get in each ending is quite strange as well. If you do too much good, Constantine wishes that you weren't so obedient in the projection scene and during the ending as well, remarking you with names such as Good Kid. This obviously is the opposite case and reaction given if you act negatively towards him. These 2 endings aren't anything special, neither are they as important. You don't learn a lot of information about the game from getting these endings besides they're the very last shot you get at the game, where you see your own cat corpse on a chair. These are all big reveals in their own right, but teeter on logic. It reveals to you clues that don't lead to anything but confusing and further pondering. In order to figure out the rest, we must focus on the secret endings. During your playthrough, you may find a door on the lower deck of the ship which seems accessible, the docking bay. But whenever you try to access it, you are stopped by Constantine, who prevents you from going inside. However, if you try to enter on the day Constantine breaks after leaving the garden, you will be rewarded with access to the cargo bay. The room is very dark and has very quiet atmosphere to it. It is a mighty contrast to all the other parts of the game in a very unsettling manner. The game reflects this by your only sound being your footsteps moving around the bay. As you maneuver your way through space, you are suddenly thrusted into deep sleep, only to wake back up in your habitat the next time around. Whatever you were doing in the docking bay awoke something and stopped you from exploring further. It happens again the next day if you tried to enter. However, unlike last time, you make more progress getting to the end. This trick of making you repeatedly return to the docking bay is luring, in a way where you are curious as to what could be at the end, if you can even manage making it there. It's a great way to pull you through the frights of this game and brings and invites you to learn the truth. Eventually, if you get to the end of the docking bay before the night of the asteroid, you are greeted with a miniature shuttle at the end, in perfect condition for you to ride. Along with this, Constantine notes your arrival and how he kept you from finding this, but instead of keeping you away, he allows you to leave the ship without any tricks or strings attached. You get your normal ending transition, only for the last scene to be replaced with you arriving home, as your ship lays crashed beside it. Arriving home after being trapped on that dark ship for the entirety of the game, you feel relief, if only for a brief moment. The game resets you after this reveal, and your only choice is to play from the beginning again. At this point, you feel the cycle is endless and that there's truly nothing you can do to stop it. But there is one more ending that may give you the freedom you deserve. The final ending, stranded in space. This ending is the most complicated out of all the rest, and not many people have accomplished it. Thankfully, I have, and I can guide you through how to get this ending, as I am one of the few who have figured it out. On the last day when the meteor hits, you will be in the biogarden as it happens. This is where you need to do something weird. You need to take a pair of trimmers and place it in the basket. Normally if you do this, the machine would reject it with it not being a leaf, but by taking the leaves of the plants and covering the tools in the leaves, you can send it through without detection. From here, simply go outside and you will find the leaves and the tool floating spaced by the ship. Go down and pick them up. From here, use the trimmers and cut the rope you are tied to. Constantine will beg you to stop as you cut away. Soon, you will free yourself from the ship as you float away silently, and Constantine scolds you for your actions. The ship grows farther and farther away until the game ends. I want to add, do not perform this ending until you have done all the other endings and gotten the secrets, because this ending completely wipes your save data. This ending is satisfying but downright frightening. The outside space scene on its own is scary. Adding onto it with this ending makes it worse, because you may be free, but at the same time you aren't. Valentina is alone, floating through the space endlessly. They will be out there forever, until the day they die from starvation, dehydration, or the deep cold of space. These endings, when combined, bring together the truth of this story and the morbid state of it. While fine on the surface, they each hold a deeper meaning that deserves to be talked about. This, plus the main story, leads you to a tale that is disturbing and unwanted. So, with the endings out of the way, I'll talk about what the story is truly about and share my theory of what it is. Let me start with our two main endings and talk about the biggest question they hold that deserves a desperate answer. Why is there a humanoid hairless cat in a chair? Like, seriously, why a cat? What does this mean? Is the game saying that we, Valentina, are a cat? But why reveal this to us out of the blue? It doesn't impact our story, does it? That's what I thought at first. But when I replayed the game, believe me when I say I was shocked to see when the credits to the game have an entire segment dedicated to cats. What do cats have to do with the story? I ended up taking a break from banging my head against the keyboard and took the time to process this information. Why show us a clear stand-in for Valentina as a cat? After all, we know for a fact that our character is a human. Or are they? Our character doesn't speak, and we are constantly guided by Constantine to do everything around the ship like a mindless animal. Let me propose a theory to you all, and feel free to argue with me in the comments if you wish. We are indeed playing as a humanoid cat named Valentina. In fact, what if Constantine was also a cat at one point? At the end of our regular endings, we know Valentina becomes the new Constantine and we are playing as a new character. What if this was all an experiment? Earth, in this case, Russia, is sending animals to space to tend to spaceships for some kind of experiment, and they use a monitor to direct and instruct these cats on how to tend to the ship. Whenever one fails in an urgent event, or their task in general, they are wiped out and placed into the monitor, and become the new guiding face for the next subject. This part can be proven by the fact that in the end of the game, we are hit by an asteroid that destroys the ship. This would have been Valentina's failure, causing her to be turned by Constantine and become the new computer to guide the next cat. Secondly, the main station of the ship is always locked off no matter what. I can only take a guess and say that the room is where they keep all the other hibernating cats, awaiting their turn on the ship once the current one fails. This would explain why Valentina wakes on the ship already far away from Earth, and yet still claims it as day one. And the ending where she finds the escape shuttle? Well, Valentina does escape and get to go home, but I do want to mention that last frame of that ending. You see Valentina approaching the door to a regular home after landing on the Earth, not a facility that could have created these humanoid cats. But what if that's the point? This is Valentina's home. Her owner's home? Perhaps this group of scientists that ended up using cats took them from people's homes to use for experiments, or bought the cats from their owners, with Valentina being one of them? Honestly, this theory sounds very plausible, and perhaps true? But wait, what about the hooded figure? Who could that be? Obviously they mean something to Valentina to be there sticking around in her head. At first, I believed it was a perception of Constantine in her mind. But that can't be right if we were going with this theory. In fact, I believe that perhaps the hooded figure represents the scientist that changed Valentina and sent her to space. In our habitat, there is a painting that, on certain occasions, depicts a hooded figure commanding a set of people atop a hill. I believe this is a representation of what Valentina sees in the figure. A person with authority, making them, the group of cats, do this experiment in space against their will. And the reason why it replaces Constante over and over with its voice, watching over Valentina, is because that's her fragmented memory washing over her. She is picturing Constante as that scientist, believing he is a danger to her and the other cats. It's why in every scene he appears in, they are in a position of power over Valentina, where she can't do anything. Okay, maybe I'm just having too much fun for my own liking. I really just wanted a segment where I could share my personal bias and idea as to what this confusing story could mean. After all, I love sharing my interpretation of things to see how people would react, or if they agree with me. It's fine if people don't agree with it. That's why it's a theory in the first place. Anyways, I'm not going to push this further than it already has to be. Let's talk about what this video is really about, how unsettling the game is. Apart from this game's mysterious manner of storytelling, it is phenomenal in how it disturbs you in a light way, and puts you on the edge the entire time. I've already talked about Constante's off-putting voice, but I need to mention it again. The way he speaks to you in this unchangeable tone and such a standout accent makes me feel very uncomfortable during my first playthrough. Because their voice is so unfamiliar, we treat it as a sign that something is wrong. The monotone voice of his doesn't help either. Him being the only voice you hear in this confined ship doesn't make you feel like you are truly safe. Speaking of space, the atmosphere of the game is very off-putting as well. You are stranded in the middle of space as, that we know of, the only living soul on the ship. No other living soul is seen by you, and no sign of survivable territory is found outside. The bleak colors of the game's environment trigger a sense of disarray that grows when the game continues on longer and longer. Finally, the dead silence of this game's environment creates this strange feeling that disturbs you. You aren't home. You are in fact far from it, away from signs of civilization, people, or normality. This feeling is even worse when you consider that the game was made by those in Russia, so the way the game is arranged is meant to represent that country in its own light. But when you are playing this game from another country, like me, it becomes an unsettling mess that puts you on edge. One other thing I must note is the looping process of the game. Although it can feel like a daily work simulation the first few days of the game, it changes in a way that impacts your state of mind while playing the game. That dream scene as Constante talks to you with the projector is a scene that may influence you to change your mind and gameplay style, with the way it negatively talks down to you your in-game actions. Seeing you change along with the environmental and gameplay changes that are thrown at you creates a wavering sense of something going completely wrong, or that it already has. You don't know why everything in the ship is changing, but you know something is happening. Your goal to figure out what that is and what creates this dangerous sense to you is something that is amiss. In fact, I was more afraid of what was happening than concerned when I played the game, and I'm certain many others might have felt the same way as well. The imagery in the game is the last part that tries to scare you. The sudden appearances of the hooded figure and the sudden cuts to certain areas can startle you when you least expect it. Even the ending with the asteroid does this phenomenally. They all factor together and work to help create something that makes you, the player, feel very uncomfortable. You know nothing is right, but there is nothing you can do about it. You just have to endure the sudden things the game throws at you. This is why the game is so unsettling. You have this sense that is with you from the beginning to end that things are very wrong. The ship you are on is wrong. The things around you are wrong. Maybe even you, Valentina, are wrong. All this, combined with its amazing narrative, creates a story that deserves more praise than what it has. I understand this game is one very hard to come by, as its limitations on certain devices make it difficult to even find. That, plus its lack of an audience, makes it lost media in a way where I wish it wasn't. You see, I adore this game and its concept to end and back. Everything about it appealed to me, and the major role it played in my childhood helps me understand my desire to find fear nowadays in frightening situations and scary forms of media. ANGEST may not be a horror game, but its concept and tale is worth quite a lot considering how much it can shake up anyone who plays such a game. I know not many people will see this video, but if you do, I can only suggest we find a way to spread this game to a new group of people who haven't witnessed it before, as it's a story that is one that can be reinterpreted and shaped into something even greater, something that people can learn from and create more tales with such an unsettling feel to it. Anyways, I've run dry on my things I've wanted to talk about with this game. I believe it's about time I say my farewells and let you all move on to other things. This is Psychedia, and thank you for watching my video. Goodbye for now.